Mobility training tip number 1, don't force stretches. The tendency when you're trying to create length in muscle tissue is to crank on the stretch or try to get it to push as far as you possibly can. And that might give you some results, but they're usually going to be short term. You're probably going to snap back tight the next day or maybe even a few minutes later. So what we advise is for you to get really close to the tension where you start feeling the stretch and then cycle a couple of breaths. See if that gives you access to a little bit more range of motion. That's going to tell you that you're on the right path. Go a couple inches more, cycle a breath. Go a couple inches more, cycle another breath. See if the tension will alleviate and allow you to go further by breathing in through the nose, out through the nose or mouth. And it's going to kind of tell your nervous system that it's okay for you to continue to move that body part in the direction you want to go. And you're going to find that that's going to open up some mobility for you, and it's going to make it last a whole lot longer. Mobility training tip number 2. Try and do mobility or stretching movements in 3 dimensions. Most stretching happens in a linear fashion. You can add lateral as well as multi-directional or rotational to any stretch. Here's one example. You can start out with a stride, both hands on the ground. I could move front to back on that stretch. I could move left to right, or I could move rotationally. So with all the stretches that you do commonly, try to see if you can add in 2 other dimensions to that movement. Mobility tip number 3, make sure you actually need mobility in an area that you're stretching or trying to create mobility in. Sometimes we spend a whole lot of time doing stretches that we see on the internet, or maybe we think we need it, and we're not really sure if it's affecting the overall pattern of movement. At the end of the day, that's the most important thing. How specific muscle tightness or a specific chain of muscle tightness could potentially be affecting movement. If the movement is good, I would leave the stretching and extra mobility work alone. Mobility training tip number 4. Tightness sometimes has a purpose. Usually it has a purpose. A muscle doesn't just all of a sudden get tight overnight and decide to tighten up on you. There is a reason, it's probably a protective reason, that a muscle is in that state. So if we free up the range of motion, that's almost like taking the brakes off your car and then driving down the street. We want to make sure after we free up the range of motion and create more mobility, we're then adding motor control back in. We can do that through balance drills, through stability drills, things that look like standing on one leg, crawling, motor control, things that help to gain body awareness in and around the joint that you just stretched. Mobility training tip number 5. Make sure you consider all the systems of the body. We're not just this meat suit walking around that you could stretch and strengthen into function. I know that's gross. But the idea here is just strengthening a muscle or activating it or creating mobility in and around the joint does not mean that the entire system is going to work, especially because you have these other systems on board. Your circulatory system, your endocrine system, your digestive system, your nervous system, most importantly. These are the things that are also involved in determining the habits of positions, postures, and ways that you move through space throughout the day that are going to determine where tightness shows up and where restrictions show up and maybe some dysfunction in movement patterns. So consider all the systems of the body. One way to do that is to make sure that breathing is on board when you're going through mobility drills. Mobility training tip number 6, consistency is key. Like most things in fitness, if you're looking to try to improve your mobility, flexibility, and your movement patterns, you're going to have to consider the fact that you've been doing things the way you've been doing them for a while, and you're going to need to break the habit of those patterns. So it's not foreign for us to give people the prescription of 3 or 4 times a day doing corrective exercise and movement and mobility drills to try to make that change early on. You don't have to do it that many times forever, but in the beginning, you're going to want that kind of consistency and frequency so you can break the habits of the way that you do things. Mobility training tip number 7, know when to call in a professional. At some point, you're going to realize that using a foam roller or doing mobilization drills or stretches are just not getting you the result that you need. In that case, and it's a very small case, you may need to call in someone who really knows what they're doing that could expedite that process. And there are good manual therapists and physical therapists out there that can do that. Mobility training tip number 8, using a foam roller wisely. A foam roller has been known to increase circulation, increase core temperature of the body as you go back and forth. Increasing pressure on specific parts of the body can help them to release. But know that on the back end, after doing that, you're going to want to follow up with some type of mobility drill, corrective exercise, or motor control drill to kind of solidify that newfound range of motion that you've created.